Welcome to the debate. Today we confront a figure whose historical image is, well, it's less a portrait and more a palimpsest of myth, bias, and, I would argue, profound strategic genius. Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh of the Ptolemaic dynasty. The sheer volume of material written about her forces us to confront a pretty fundamental disagreement. Was she a brilliant, highly effective ruler whose competence is simply obscured by the propaganda of her enemies? Or was she tragically merely the victim of the largest character assassination campaign in ancient history?
And that contest is so essential because the stakes were, frankly, monumental. It involved the fate of the entire Mediterranean world. The central disagreement about her legacy isn't just about her personality, it's really about causality and external impact. Was Cleopatra primarily a political genius whose reign brought 2 decades of vital stability to Egypt? Or should we focus instead on her role as a foreign power player whose ambitious, very high-risk alliances directly contributed to the collapse of the Roman Republic?
I'm going to argue forcefully that Cleopatra was a highly successful political genius, that her undeniable competence and administrative achievements in Egypt are the true measure of her reign. We absolutely have to separate the historical evidence of her rule from the Roman slander designed to demonize her.
Foreign queen who provided the perfect, critical narrative Octavian needed to mobilize Rome against Antony, thereby legitimizing the annexation of Egypt and, well, the end of the Republic.
When you look beyond the romance novels and, the Hollywood scripts, the true measure of Cleopatra's legacy rests squarely on her administrative and intellectual achievements. These achievements, they speak volumes of true genius and political rigor. We know she commanded armies by age 21, which signals a level of command experience and political training that's rarely seen, particularly in a Ptolemaic monarch.
Command experience is certainly valuable, sure, but political prudence in relation to Rome was far more paramount for what was essentially a vassal state.
But consider the depth of her intellectual preparation. She was trained in Alexandria, the academic epicenter of the Hellenistic world, home to the greatest library and scholars of the time. This wasn't just rote learning, it resulted in functional, practical genius. She was famously multilingual, speaking not only Greek, the language of her own court, but also Egyptian, Aramaic, Hebrew, and Latin. This linguistic skill allowed her to navigate the complex diplomatic landscape without relying on interpreters, a political advantage completely unheard of in the 300-year history of the Ptolemaic line, none of whom had bothered to learn the language of the people they ruled. That act alone signaled profound political acumen.
That recognition of Egyptian culture was a clever political move, I'll grant you. It was designed to secure internal stability, and on that front, she was wildly successful. But we have to weigh that against the external calamity her foreign policy created.
Well, externally, she maintained independence for 22 years while Rome was tearing itself apart in civil wars. And internally, she delivered prosperity. Her rule brought Egypt remarkable stability. She stabilized the currency, managed that vast, notoriously cumbersome bureaucracy, and effectively curbed systemic corruption, specifically among tax officials and the powerful priesthood. But the definitive proof of her outstanding managerial skills came during a severe drought. She immediately opened the granaries to the public and provided a tax amnesty. The historical record shows that throughout the rest of her reign, there were no subsequent revolts. This wasn't luck. This was outstanding governance in a kingdom historically plagued by peasant uprisings.
I see why you emphasize that domestic success, and look, it is undeniable. But political history is not judged solely by internal stability, especially when that stability is bought at the cost of catastrophic external interference. Regardless of how expertly she managed the Nile's bureaucracy, her high-stakes intervention in the Roman civil wars destabilized the entire Western world. History, as written by her Roman opponents, remembers her as the figure who used lurid affairs to, quote, destroy 2 of Rome's finest generals, Caesar and Antony, and directly led to the end of the Republic.
And that framing is precisely the problem. It's manufactured.
It may be manufactured, but it was politically potent.
And Cleopatra failed utterly to account for that political reality. Her and Antony's public behavior, especially after the Roman victory at Philippi, sitting on golden thrones, dressing up as Egyptian deities, the, quote, ridiculous celebrations, it profoundly offended the Republic's sensibilities, which still nominally valued austerity and simplicity. This behavior, whether it was genuine hubris or just Egyptian custom, provided Octavian with the perfect, actionable narrative to convince the conservative majority in Rome that Antony had gone native and that the Egyptian queen represented a genuine threat of foreign, megalomaniac rule. She handed him the villain he needed.
This leads directly to our first and perhaps most frustrating core point: the definition of leadership itself. Why is it that powerful women like Cleopatra are uniquely defined by their sexuality and romance? Caesar and Antony had countless affairs, and those liaisons are treated as, footnotes, evidence of their robust masculinity, perhaps. But hers are weaponized. They become the entire lens through which her political career is judged. That is not historical analysis. That is a historical double standard and blatant prejudice against women in power used as a political strategy.
I wholeheartedly agree on the existence and the immorality of the gender bias. We can't deny that Octavian strategically weaponized gendered stereotypes, the trope of the seductive Eastern queen corrupting virtuous Romans. However, as a head of state, Cleopatra's job was to manage political perception, especially when dealing with a xenophobic power like Rome. We have to focus on the practical political impact of her relationships, not their moral or romantic standing. Consider her time with Caesar. She, quote, kept Caesar lounging in Egypt for months when Rome desperately needed him to secure the West.
Okay, but lounging, I think that's a gross misrepresentation.
The perception in Rome was that she was a political distraction, undermining his ability to govern the state at a critical juncture. When Caesar returned, he faced immediate questions about his prolonged absence. This perceived indulgence created a political weakness that the senators, who were already concerned about his monarchical ambitions, immediately exploited.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because it implies Caesar was some hapless victim of her charms, rather than a powerful, calculating politician who found profound intellectual value in his time there. The source material confirms he was fascinated by Egyptian culture, astronomical knowledge, and administration. His extended stay was productive, not indulgent. When he finally returned to Rome, that trip directly led to major Roman reforms that improved the lives of millions. He reformed the calendar, he commissioned a census, established new municipal laws, and drew up plans for a public library. So let's not blame the queen for Rome's strange politics or for the senators who worried that Caesar's exposure to Ptolemaic monarchy was infectious. His assassination was about Roman fears of their own ruler, not about his girlfriend.
That's a compelling argument regarding Caesar's intellectual curiosity. But the outcome, Caesar's assassination, proves that his extended stay was indeed perceived as a symptom of ambition and foreign influence that needed to be curtailed. His failure to return promptly signaled a change in priorities that terrified the conservative elite. And that brings us to the subsequent, far more profound miscalculation, the post-Caesar alliances. After his death, she involved herself again, meddling in Roman matters, and it ultimately led to disaster for her kingdom. You simply cannot ignore that she and Antony were objectively a political and military disaster for Rome, regardless of Octavian's spin.
I would strongly frame her actions not as reckless meddling, but as necessary high-stake health preservation. When Caesar died, Egypt suddenly lacked its powerful protector. The material explicitly states that it was the Roman factions, first the liberators, then the triumvirs, who came demanding her ships, her grain, her immense financial aid. She had no real choice but to align herself with the strongest surviving Roman power players, Octavian and Antony, if only for the security of her son, Caesarion, and the continued independence of her kingdom. Alignment was a strategic defensive necessity.
Alignment is one thing. The level of involvement and the nature of the partnership with Antony crossed a sacred, unforgivable line in Roman political culture. The alliance was military, personal, and geopolitical, and it culminated in the infamous donations of Alexandria in 34 BCE. And we need to be clear about what this was. Antony, acting as a Roman magistrate, publicly divided vast Roman-controlled territories in the east, client kingdoms, provinces, allied states, and gave them as eternal inheritances to Cleopatra's children.
It was a recognition of reality on the ground in the east, where Ptolemaic influence was still dominant.
But to Rome, this was treasonous megalomania. A Roman general, one of the triumvirs meant to protect the Republic, was publicly handing over Roman lands to a foreign queen and their half-Roman children. This display, where they sat on golden thrones and declared themselves living gods, provided Octavian with undeniable, tangible evidence that Antony was abandoning Rome for the East. It wasn't just a rumor, it was a physical, public display of contempt for Republican tradition that gave Octavian the legal and moral grounds he needed to declare war, not on Antony, but on Cleopatra herself, and thereby annex Egypt.
You're judging a highly successful administrator by a few controversial public relations stunts designed to establish legitimacy in the East, where divine kingship was the standard. You have to reconcile that supposed meddling with her exceptional administrative track record. I mean, how could someone solely interested in pleasure and self-indulgence manage a stable, solvent nation for 22 years while navigating the greatest political storms of the Mediterranean? Her ability to keep Egypt solvent and riot-free suggests a rigorous intellect and focus, not frivolous indulgence. She was successful at the micro level where it counted for her people.
Her internal success doesn't negate her external strategic failure in the face of insurmountable Roman power, which is the ultimate measure in political history. My focus remains on the third critical point, the true end of the Republic. The outcome is what defines her external legacy. Octavian successfully convinced all of Rome that the existential threat posed by Antony and Cleopatra was real. This collective fear, whether manufactured or not, resulted in the swift annexation of the last great Hellenistic kingdom and the end of the Republic. Her decisions, especially the donations, made her the perfect foreign villain for his goals.
That entire narrative, including the donations, is filtered to the lens of Roman historical writers, her enemies who wrote often decades or centuries after the fact. We cannot let narrative replace causality. Octavian was the aggressor. He manufactured the pretext, attacked Antony, annexed Egypt, and declared himself emperor. The political genius here was Octavian's ability to externalize the blame for Rome's internal crisis onto a foreign woman.
And that is the painful political reality. The bitter truth is that whether she caused the end of the Republic or merely provided the pretext, she was the essential piece of Octavian's strategy. Octavian needed a monstrous figure, a wealthy, foreign, female threat, to unify a war-weary Rome behind him and legitimize his unilateral power grab. Without the drama and the perceived threat of the Egyptian queen and her influence over Antony, his campaign to end the Republic would have been viewed as just another Roman civil war, not an essential defense of Roman virtue.
Her existence and her effectiveness merely gave Octavian the most convenient political scapegoat he could possibly ask for. We have to acknowledge that the only reason we debate her now is because the history that survived was written by the mouth of the victors, those who systematically erased or sexualized her administrative achievements to support their own political narrative.
And that's the nuance we have to grapple with. We're forced to analyze why that narrative worked so well. Her choices, her visible political ties to the general who challenged Octavian, the public displays of Ptolemaic power allowed her internal administrative genius to be utterly overshadowed by the profound external strategic failure in the face of inevitable Roman expansion. Her success in Egypt was irrelevant the moment she attempted to play in Rome's high-stakes game without sufficient force to back her ambition.
I maintain that Cleopatra was the last pharaoh who fought resiliently and brilliantly to maintain national independence for over 2 decades.
utilizing her formidable intellect, economic acumen, and political acuity to manage an impossible geopolitical situation. We must judge her by the stability she brought to her people, not by the biases of the men who eventually conquered her. We have to look beyond the simplified, sexualized, femme fatale image perpetuated by Octavian's propaganda machine.
The debate is complicated precisely because her effective internal rule coincided directly with external political choices that fundamentally impacted Rome. Her foreign policy strategy, however motivated by self-preservation, inadvertently provided Octavian with the essential, simple justification he needed, that foreign megalomaniac threat to destroy the Republic and establish the empire. It is the clash between her remarkable ability to govern and her profound inability to manage the political fallout in Rome that defines her legacy.
So we are ultimately weighing her profound and attested administrative success, economic stability, no revolts, effective management of a massive state, against the severe consequence of her foreign policy decisions. And it was a policy constantly forced to react to the civil wars of the greatest superpower in the world.
Indeed. The material compels every listener to separate the facts of governance from the rumor and strategic propaganda of the victors. The question remains, do we believe the stereotype of the seductress, or do we believe the hard evidence of administrative talent that maintained an independent kingdom for 22 years? It is a fascinating question that requires rigorous self-correction from the modern audience to fully appreciate her complexity.